I think if I predicted last year, and I was going to ask you, what did I say last year, that China was going to be the big elephant in the room, kind of making some big moves. I think this year it's actually going to be the U.S. I think that we're now seeing a sufficient awareness and understanding of the importance of the crypto industry within various branches of U.S. government, whether it's out of the administration, the Biden administration, whether it's out of Congress, Senate, or the House. I think we are seeing a lot of understanding of the importance of this sector to the future of the digital economy. And so I do think this will be the year that certain things start to land. Now, policymaking takes a very long time, so I certainly would not predict that 2022 is the year that we see a lot of the policy enacted. But I do think that we're going to see maybe an uptick in kind of the hearings and the activity that's happening within the U.S. government and U.S. regulators focusing on this space. So that's one thing I would say that, I think we kind of already see that trend happening. I also think it's the year that we'll see a little more CBDC activity happening. So whether this is really the year of, dollar coin or the Fed doing something or not, we'll have to see. That experimentation continues to be kind of ongoing, whether it's the EU. I actually do think the EU could lap the US in terms of issuance of digital coins. So that's something keeping an eye on to see what happens there. And of course, the yuan is getting more and more, digital yuan is getting more and more traction. So we'll have to kind of see what goes on with China and how China is getting to expand its use of digital yuan beyond the borders of China into a lot of other spaces, and what that does to accelerate maybe some of the movement in the CBDC space. I do think that NFTs are going to shift from being strictly about art and kind of a digital representation into being a little bit more about rights. And so using an NFT as an entrance, either to a metaverse, a space in the metaverse, or into a physical location, right? Showing proof that you own an NFT in order to enter into a physical space, that's going to become something that moves forward. I think part of that's because the psychology around vaccine certification in many parts of the world, having to flash a credential to get into something is becoming very normal activity. And so having to flash an NFT to prove that you own the ape or the monkey or the whatever it is to get into a space was something that doesn't really seem that weird. So I think there's implication there for kind of ticketing, but also for kind of thinking even beyond that about rights. And then I think this is the year we're going to see a ton of activity in DAOs that's already happening. It's going to continue. I'm curious to see if we get a little bit more sense of the law around DAOs and structure there, if that's something that winds up being, moves forward and moves ahead. Lots of activity happening there. Lots of experimentation on the company side with DAOs. Can they use them internally or externally? Can they use them as ways of creating a consortium kind of model? All of that I think will be very exciting. And then of course, I think we're going to see more and more investment money flooding into this space. Whether we get ETFs, kind of what those look like, that really start taking off, whether we see more SPACs or public companies in this space. I think we're going to see more and more companies move out of that kind of very early sort of seed phase or token phase into something more baked and mature. And that's going to have tremendous implications for the job market, the labor market moving into this industry, and what that does overall for its valuation. I think that we've made tremendous progress in the DeFi ecosystem. I think there's a little more understanding about what DeFi is and why it's interesting. It's clearly not a fad or a flash in the pan. Now, I think that DeFi this is going to be more dependent on regulation and regulatory moves than some of the other things. I don't really see NFTs or DAOs necessarily, being hyper responsive or super sensitive to the threat of regulation. DeFi is going to be almost necessarily. So it's a little hard to say because I don't really know what regulation is going to come down ultimately. And I know a lot of people are working very hard to make sure the regulation that does come down is supportive of innovation, and also protects rights and protects users and has a balance there. So that's when I hesitate to kind of put any parameters around. I think we're going to see. I think it's productive to see a lot more experimentation in DeFi, more companies that get started, maybe some that sort of pivot a little bit and become maybe even more focused on kind of one particular offering versus a whole suite of offerings. Or it could go the other way, where I think we're going to see some companies become more conglomerates and have a variety of offerings, and some that are kind of smaller and maybe then get absorbed into other ones or whatever it might look like, similar to how companies tend to grow in a new space. So I think you're going to see some of that kind of thing happening. I always predict, every year I talk about insurance. I think that insurance remains something, it's just so broken and there's so much room. And so I think that insurance regulation, though, is also a really important thing, right? At state level and others. So I think that seeing it'd be interesting to see if insurance regulators really get involved in that space, because I think that could have a tremendous catalyzing and catapulting effect on the entire DeFi ecosystem. So that's something that, again, I don't really have a prediction around it, but I think it's a space to watch for sure. And I remain really positive on DeFi and bullish on DeFi, but I also think that there is the possibility that something could come in that just really, puts a big damper, a big damper on the industry, at least for a little while everyone figures out how to work around it. The only other thing I'd say is that I think we're just going to see more and more people pouring into the crypto ecosystem, whether it's formally, professionally pivoting their careers, whether it's just getting involved in a Discord or in a DAO in some fashion, whether it's moving into an NFT or having a digital wallet. I think we're going to see more and more people all around the world entering this space in some capacity. I just think that that's a trend that is never going to reverse, in my view. So, and I actually think 2022 will be a year of major acceleration in adoption. Now, I use that term as I defined it very broadly. I don't necessarily mean that you are investing or whatever or building. I mean that you are engaging with it in some fashion. So I'm excited to see that and what that portends as more and more people and in more and more jurisdictions get involved here. There's going to be a signal, I think, to a lot of the leaders of government and industry that this is something to really take very seriously and pay a lot of attention to and be very focused on. So I think it's going to be a great year.